Tom Hendricks backed his Ford pickup to the edge of his pole shed and started unloading old tires. Not 10 tires, not 50 tires. 342 truck tires, stacked in neat rows against every wall of his 24 by 32-foot metal shed. His neighbors watched from their property lines, shaking their heads. Tom wasn't building a tire store. He wasn't running an illegal dump. He was insulating his workshop, and everyone in the valley thought he'd lost his mind. Dale Morrison, who'd operated a machine shop in Kalispell for 23 years, stood at his fence watching Tom work. "Tom," he called out, "you planning on opening a junkyard, or you just gone completely crazy?" Tom didn't answer, just kept stacking tires 3 high against the north wall. Sarah Chen, who taught chemistry at Flathead High School and prided herself on understanding practical science, drove past and stopped her station wagon. "Tom, those tires are going to smell terrible when it gets hot. You know that, right? And they're a fire hazard. What are you thinking?" Tom wiped his hands on his jeans and smiled. "Thermal mass, Sarah. Same principle as your brick house, just a different material." Sarah laughed and drove on, certain Tom had confused thermal mass with thermal disaster. By October 20th, Tom had completed his tire wall. 3 rows high, packed tight with dirt he'd screened from his property, creating a barrier 36 inches thick around the entire perimeter of his shed. The structure looked absurd. The metal shed, which had cost him $3,200 that summer, now sat inside a fortress of black rubber circles. His heating system was equally bizarre. A single-barrel stove he'd welded together from a 55-gallon drum, equipped with a 6-inch flue pipe, positioned in the southeast corner. Nothing fancy. No forced air, no thermostat, no backup system. Just Tom, his tires, his dirt, and a cast-iron wood stove that most folks wouldn't trust to heat a doghouse, let alone a 768-square-foot workshop where he planned to spend Montana's brutal winter building custom furniture. Frank Patterson, a petroleum engineer who'd moved to Montana from Texas in 1974, stopped by Tom's place on October 23rd. Frank had heated his 2,400-square-foot home with a modern propane furnace, had studied thermodynamics at Texas A&M, and considered himself an authority on heating efficiency. "Tom, I've run the numbers in my head," Frank said, examining the tire walls with obvious skepticism. "Those tires might give you some insulation, sure, but you're talking about heating 768 square feet with a single-barrel stove? In Montana winter, you'll burn a cord of wood a week just to keep it above freezing. My propane system uses 1-200 gallons a season to keep my house at 68 degrees. You've got metal walls, metal roof, and you think rubber and dirt are going to make a damn bit of difference." Tom loaded another armful of split tamarack into his wood rick. "Frank, I appreciate your concern. Let's see how it plays out." Frank walked away, muttering about stubborn old homesteaders who refused to accept modern engineering. The ridicule spread through the Flathead Valley like wildfire through August grass. At the hardware store, at the grain elevator, at Sunday services at Valley Christian Church, Tom Hendricks and his tire shed became the running joke of fall 1978. "Heard Tom's building a Goodyear cabin," someone would say. "No, he's starting a tire recycling center," another would answer. "Man's got more rubber than sense." What none of them asked, what not one of his critics stopped to consider, was a simple question. What did Tom Hendricks understand about thermodynamics that 3 engineers, 2 contractors, and a high school chemistry teacher had completely missed? Before we reveal exactly how Tom's tire fortress outperformed every heated building in the valley that winter, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, what happens next will change how you think about heating forever. Tom had started his research in June 1978, not with modern heating manuals but with old construction techniques he'd learned from his grandfather, who'd homesteaded in Saskatchewan in 1912. His grandfather had taught him a principle that modern builders had forgotten. Mass equals stability. A heavy building holds temperature. A light building surrenders to whatever's happening outside. Tom's metal shed, as delivered from the manufacturer, weighed approximately 2,100 pounds. Metal frame, metal panels, metal roof. Light as a feather in construction terms. The building had R value of maybe 8 in the walls, R10 in the ceiling with the thin fiberglass batting Tom had added. Respectable for a utility shed. Pathetic for a Montana workshop where temperatures drop to 30 below zero and stay there for weeks. Tom's tire solution seemed ridiculous because people didn't understand what he was building. He wasn't adding insulation in the conventional sense. He was adding thermal mass, 180,000 pounds of it. Each truck tire, filled with screened dirt and tamped solid, weighed approximately 120 pounds. Multiply that by 342 tires, stacked 3 high in a continuous wall 36 inches thick, and you've got mass that would make a brick building jealous. But mass alone wasn't the innovation. Tom had created something more elegant, more efficient, and more powerful than anything his critics had considered possible with garbage. He'd built a passive solar thermal battery that would charge during the day and discharge at night, moderating temperature swings and reducing heating fuel consumption to levels that would seem impossible to anyone who'd spent a Montana winter in a standard metal building. Sarah Chen returned on November 3rd with her husband Mike, a civil engineer. They'd come to reason with Tom one more time before winter locked in. "Tom," Mike said, "Sarah's worried about you. We both are. I've built commercial buildings from here to Missoula. I understand R values, heat loss, BTU calculations. Your tire wall might give you some benefit, but the math doesn't support what you're claiming. You're losing heat through that metal roof faster than any amount of rubber can compensate for. You're going to freeze out here, and when you do, you're going to feel pretty foolish." Tom invited them inside. The shed temperature read 58 degrees Fahrenheit on a simple analog thermometer mounted to the south wall. Outside temperature was 34 degrees. Tom hadn't lit his stove in 18 hours. "Mike," Tom said quietly, "that's 24 degrees of temperature differential with zero heat input. The sun's been charging these tires for 3 weeks. They're holding heat and releasing it slow." "Real slow." Mike shook his head. "Anecdotal, Tom. Wait until January. Then we'll talk." Dale Morrison stopped by on November 15th. He'd been running his shop furnace since October 28th, burning through propane at $180 a week. "Tom, I'll be straight with you. I think you've wasted time and effort on something that won't work. But I'm curious, what made you think of tires?" Tom showed him the calculations he'd done that summer. "Dale, a tire filled with dirt creates dead air spaces in the sidewall and tread pattern. That's insulation. But the mass of the dirt and rubber combined, that's thermal storage. During the day, when the sun hits this south wall, those tires absorb heat. Direct solar radiation, ambient air temperature, even heat escaping from inside the building. They soak it up like a sponge soaks up water. Then at night, when temperature drops, that stored heat radiates back inward. It's not fast. It's not dramatic, but it's constant. I don't need to maintain 68 degrees. I need to maintain 45 to 50 degrees as a baseline. My stove brings it up to working temperature when I'm here. The tires keep it from dropping to ambient when I'm not." Dale looked at the tire walls, at the dirt filling every space, at the careful stacking that left no gaps. "All right, Tom, you've thought this through. I'll give you that. But thinking and doing are different things. Let's see if it survives December." By late November, Tom's shed had become a conversation piece across 3 counties. The Kalispell Weekly Interlake ran a small piece about local man's unusual insulation experiment, complete with a photo of Tom standing next to his tire wall, looking every bit the stubborn eccentric his neighbors thought he was. Letters to the editor ran 8-1 against Tom's approach. "Fire hazard," wrote one concerned citizen. "Eyesore," complained another. "Waste of good materials," added a third. Tom read them all, smiled, and kept splitting firewood. He'd calculated he'd need 4 cords to heat his shed through winter. His neighbors, heating similar-sized spaces with conventional methods, were projecting 6 to 8 cords minimum. The proof wouldn't come from opinion pieces. It would come from thermometers, from wood consumption, from the brutal mathematics of Montana winter. What Tom understood, and what his critics had never considered, was the complete thermal system he'd created, not just the individual components. Modern insulation works by trapping dead air. Fiberglass, foam board, cellulose, they all function on the same principle. Create millions of tiny air pockets, prevent convection, slow conductive heat transfer. It works, it's effective, but it's passive resistance, not active storage. Tom's tire wall did both. The air spaces in the tire sidewalls and tread patterns provided R value comparable to 6 inches of fiberglass, approximately R19. Not spectacular by modern standards, but respectable. The dirt filling added thermal mass with a specific heat capacity of 0.2 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit. Multiply 180,000 pounds by 0.2, and Tom had created a thermal battery capable of storing 36,000 BTUs per degree of temperature change. To put that in perspective, raising his shed temperature from 40 to 50 degrees meant his tire wall absorbed and stored 360,000 BTUs, the equivalent of burning 30 pounds of seasoned firewood. The science behind Tom's innovation traced back to principles older than modern insulation. Korean Ondol heating systems, developed over 2,000 years ago, use stone and earth mass to store heat from cooking fires and release it slowly over 24-hour cycles. Native American pit houses across the Great Plains used earth berms for exactly the same purpose: thermal mass moderation of temperature extremes. European root cellars, dug deep and lined with stone, maintained stable temperatures year-round without any active heating or cooling, purely through thermal mass interaction with the earth. Tom hadn't invented a new principle. He'd applied an ancient one using modern waste materials. Where his Korean and native predecessors used stone and earth, Tom used rubber and dirt. Where they dug into hillsides, Tom stacked against metal walls. The physics remained identical. Frank Patterson's criticism about heat loss through the metal roof was valid, partially. Metal roofs have terrible R value, typically R1 or less. Heat rises, and in a conventional metal building, it escapes through the ceiling faster than you can generate it. But Tom's system didn't rely on trapping heat at the ceiling. It relied on storing heat in the walls. As warm air rose and contacted the cold metal roof, it cooled and descended, creating a slow convection loop. That cooler air then contacted the tire walls, which radiated stored heat back into the space. The system was self-regulating. The more heat escaped through the roof, the more the walls released stored heat to compensate. It wasn't perfectly efficient, no passive system is, but it was far more efficient than any of Tom's critics had calculated, because they'd calculated heat loss without accounting for heat storage and release. Tom's barrel stove design was the final piece of his system. He'd welded it from a 55-gallon drum, lined the interior with fire bricks salvaged from an old boiler demolition, and installed a damper system that gave him precise control over burn rate. The stove weighed 340 pounds fully assembled, another chunk of thermal mass. When Tom fired it up, the steel barrel absorbed heat, the fire brick absorbed heat, and both radiated warmth long after the fire died down. He didn't need continuous burning. He'd fire the stove in early morning, let it burn hot for 3 hours, then let it coast. The barrel mass, combined with the wall mass, maintained comfortable working temperatures for 8 to 10 hours. His neighbors were running their heating systems continuously, fighting constant heat loss. Tom was pulse heating, charging his thermal battery, and letting physics do the rest. The technical specifications Tom had worked out were precise. His tire wall, measured from the metal shed exterior to the outer face of the tire stack, averaged 36 inches thick. The south wall, receiving direct solar radiation, measured 38 inches because Tom had added an extra half row of tires specifically for solar gain. Each tire was positioned with its open face oriented to trap air and maximize insulation value. The dirt fill was critical. Tom had screened it to remove rocks larger than 3/4 inch, ensuring consistent density and thermal mass throughout. He'd tamped each tire with a homemade compactor, achieving approximately 90% compaction. This eliminated air pockets that could hold moisture and reduced settling over time. The total material cost for Tom's system, $127. He'd scrounged tires from a truck shop in Whitefish that was paying to have them hauled to a landfill. The dirt came from his own property. The labor was his own, spread across 6 weekends in September and October. December 8, 1978. The National Weather Service in Missoula issued a severe weather warning for northwest Montana. Arctic air mass moving south from Canada. Expected arrival December 10th. Sustained temperatures 20 to 35 below zero. Wind chills approaching 50 below. Duration, 7 to 10 days. This wasn't unusual for Montana. This was December. But this was going to be the coldest extended period since the winter of 1972, and everyone in the Flathead Valley knew what that meant. Frozen pipes, dead batteries, livestock in danger, heating systems running at maximum capacity, propane deliveries backed up for weeks. Tom checked his woodpile. He had 3.5 cords stacked and covered, plus another cord inside his shed. He was ready. His neighbors were about to find out whether Tom's tire fortress was innovation or insulation theater. The cold front arrived on December 9th, a day early. By midnight, temperature had dropped to 8 below zero. By sunrise December 10th, it hit 22 below. By noon, 28 below. The sky was crystal clear, the air so cold it burned your lungs, and the wind was merciless. Dale Morrison's shop thermometer read 34 degrees inside his insulated metal building despite his propane furnace running continuously since 4 a.m. He was burning through fuel at rates he'd never seen, and his building couldn't maintain temperature. Sarah and Mike Chen's brick house, built in 1968 with modern insulation and a brand new Lennox furnace, was struggling to hold 62 degrees. Their furnace ran 22 hours out of 24. Frank Patterson's house, with its engineered heating system and his Texas A&M thermodynamics expertise, was burning 11 gallons of propane a day, 3 times his projected consumption. Tom fired his barrel stove at 6 a.m. on December 10th. He loaded it with tamarack and let it burn hot until 9 a.m. Or then damped it down and let it coast. By 10 a.m., his shed interior temperature read 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside temperature, 31 below zero. That's a 95-degree differential. He left the building at 10:30 a.m., closing the door behind him and heading into town for supplies. He didn't return until 4 p.m. December sun, even in Montana winter, had been hitting his south tire wall all day. When Tom opened his shed door at 4 p.m., the interior temperature read 61 degrees. It had dropped 3 degrees in 5.5 hours with no active heating, while outside temperature had varied between 28 and 33 below zero. The tire wall had released stored heat all afternoon, compensating for heat loss through the roof and door. Tom relit his stove, brought the temperature back up to 66 degrees by 6 p.m., then damped it down again for the night. December 11th brought the worst of it. Temperature dropped to 35 below zero at 4 a.m. Wind picked up to sustain 20 miles per hour, gusting to 35. Wind chill hit 48 below zero. This was dangerous cold. Frostbite in under 5 minutes. Engine blocks cracking. Water lines freezing despite heat tape. And in the Flathead Valley, people were suffering. Martha Rodriguez, a 71-year-old widow living alone in a mobile home 3 miles from Tom's place, called her son in panic at 5:30 a.m. Her furnace was running constantly, but her home temperature had dropped to 48 degrees. Her son drove through the brutal cold to pick her up, taking her to his house in Kalispell. Dale Morrison's shop hit 29 degrees inside despite his furnace maxed out. He shut down his equipment and went home, unable to work in those conditions. His heating bill for December 10th and 11th alone would exceed $400. Frank Patterson had a crisis at 7 a.m. on December 11th. His propane tank was showing less than 15%, and the delivery company was backed up with emergency calls. He called 3 other suppliers, all running 4 to 5 days behind. His house temperature was 59 degrees and dropping. His wife bundled their 2 kids, aged 8 and 5, in every piece of clothing they owned. Frank fired up his fireplace, something he'd considered decorative rather than functional, and started burning furniture to supplement his failing propane system. The engineer who'd mocked Tom's tire walls was now burning his coffee table to keep his children from hypothermia. The irony wasn't lost on him. At 8:30 a.m. on December 11th, with outside temperature holding at 34 below and his house temperature down to 56 degrees, Frank Patterson drove to Tom Hendricks's place. He found Tom in his shed, working on a cherry wood table he was building for a client in Big Fork. The shed interior was warm, genuinely warm. Frank stepped inside and his glasses immediately fogged from the temperature differential. Tom's thermometer read 63 degrees. "Tom," Frank said, his voice quiet and strained, "I need to understand what you've done here. My family's freezing. My propane's almost gone. And you're in here in a t-shirt working on furniture. How is this possible?" Tom set down his plane and walked Frank through the system he'd built. He showed him the tire walls, explained the thermal mass principle, demonstrated how the dirt filling and rubber combination created both insulation and storage. He pointed to his wood consumption. 2 fires per day, 3 hours each, approximately 40 pounds of wood total. His shed had been warm for 62 consecutive hours while using less than 250 pounds of firewood. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button and comment below. What's the coldest temperature you've ever experienced in your home? Let's hear your stories. Frank spent an hour in Tom's shed that morning, taking notes, asking questions, measuring wall thickness and tire spacing. Tom shared everything. No patents, no trade secrets, no competitive advantage. Just practical knowledge freely given. Frank, Tom said, your house is brick. It's got thermal mass already, but your walls are hollow. Brick veneer over wood frame with fiberglass in between. You've got mass on the outside, insulation in the middle, and heated air on the inside. The mass can't store heat because it's on the wrong side of the insulation. If you were to add thermal mass on your interior walls, stone, brick, even water barrels, you'd cut your heating costs in half. Frank listened, skeptical but desperate. He asked the question that had been burning in his mind since he'd walked in. Tom, your thermometer says 63 degrees. Outside it's 34 below. That's 97 degrees of difference. You're losing heat through that metal roof. I can see it in the frost patterns. You're losing heat through the door, single pane window, no weather stripping. Yet this building is warm. How much wood are you actually burning per day? Tom showed him the numbers he'd been recording since December 1st. Daily wood consumption averaged 38 pounds. His barrel stove, running 2 3-hour burns per day, maintained the shed between 58 and 66 degrees regardless of outside temperature. During the extreme cold of December 10th and 11th, Tom had increased to 3 burns per day. That's 60 pounds of wood, roughly 0.05 cords. At that rate, Tom would consume 1.5 cords over the entire 4-month Montana heating season, November through February. Dale Morrison, heating a similar-sized space conventionally, was projecting 7 cords minimum. Frank's house, at 2,400 square feet, was burning through propane equivalent to 12 cords of wood per season at current consumption rates. The numbers were irrefutable. Tom's tire wall system was reducing heating fuel consumption by 78 to 80% compared to conventional methods. Not through exotic technology. Not through expensive materials. Through 180,000 pounds of rubber and dirt implementing a principle as old as Korean ondol floors. The temperature crisis lasted 9 days. From December 10th through December 18th, Northwest Montana experienced sustained cold that broke records and tested every heating system in the valley. Dale Morrison's shop stayed closed for 6 of those days, too cold to work, too expensive to heat. He spent the time at home, watching his heating bills climb and thinking about Tom's tire wall. Sarah Chen's brick house survived, but her heating costs for those 9 days exceeded $380. Mike Chen, the civil engineer who'd explained R values and BTU calculations to Tom back in November, ate crow quietly. He'd been wrong. The math he'd used was correct for conventional systems, but incomplete for thermal mass systems. He'd calculated heat loss without accounting for heat storage. Tom's system didn't prevent heat loss. It buffered it with stored thermal energy, releasing heat at a rate that almost perfectly matched the rate of loss through the building envelope. On December 14th, with temperature still hovering around 26 below zero, Tom invited his neighbors to his shed for coffee. Dale Morrison came. Frank Patterson brought his wife and kids. Sarah and Mike Chen showed up with a notebook full of questions. Martha Rodriguez's son drove her over after hearing about Tom's heating success. 16 people crammed into Tom's 768-square-foot shed, and every single one of them commented on the warmth. Tom's thermometer read 65 degrees. His barrel stove was burning, but the real story was in what happened next. Tom damped down his stove completely at 2 p.m., starving it of oxygen and letting the fire die. The crowd stayed until 5 p.m. Over those 3 hours, with no active heating, 17 people breathing and generating body heat, an outside temperature at 24 below. The shed temperature dropped from 65 to 59 degrees. 6 degrees in 3 hours. Dale Morrison pulled out his own thermometer to verify. "I don't believe it," he said. "My shop drops 15 degrees in an hour with the heat off. This building's holding temperature like a damn thermos." Tom explained what was happening. The tire walls, charged with heat over the previous 4 days of baseline heating, were radiating stored energy. Every tire, every pound of dirt, every cubic inch of rubber was releasing heat at a slow, steady rate. The system was self-regulating through thermal mass buffering. When Tom's stove burned hot, the walls absorbed excess heat. When the stove went cold, the walls released stored heat. The building temperature didn't spike and crash like conventional heated spaces. It modulated, rising gently during heating cycles and falling slowly during off cycles. The result was comfort, consistency, and fuel efficiency that seemed impossible to anyone trained in conventional heating engineering. Frank Patterson asked the question everyone was thinking. "Tom, would this work on a house?" Tom nodded. "It works on any building. Barn, house, shop, greenhouse. Principle's the same. Mass stores heat. More mass equals more storage equals more stability." The empirical evidence was overwhelming. Tom compiled his data and shared it with anyone who asked. From December 1st through December 31st, 1978, Tom's shed averaged 61 degrees Fahrenheit interior temperature. His wood consumption totaled 1,180 pounds, 0.59 cords. Cost at $45 per cord, $26.55. Dale Morrison shop, same size, consumed 2.3 cords in December alone. Cost $103.50. Dale's shop averaged 52 degrees interior temperature despite higher fuel consumption. Frank Patterson's house consumed the propane equivalent of 3.8 cords of wood in December at a cost of $614. Sarah Chen's house burned through $287 in heating oil. The Rodriguez mobile home, even with Martha staying with family for 2 weeks, cost $198 to heat for the month. Tom's tire wall system had delivered superior temperature stability at 1/4 to 1/6 the fuel cost of conventional systems. On January 3, 1979, Dale Morrison knocked on Tom's shed door with an unusual request. "Tom, I've been thinking about what you've done here. I want to try it on my shop. Would you help me figure out how many tires I'd need?" Tom invited him in, and they spent 2 hours working through calculations. Dale's shop was 30 by 40 feet, 1,200 square feet. Tom estimated 520 tires to create a comparable thermal mass ratio. "Dale," Tom said, "the key isn't just stacking tires. It's positioning them right, filling them completely, and integrating them with your heating system. You can't just add mass and expect magic. You need to think about solar gain, about thermal loops, about how heat moves through your space." Dale took notes. He'd spent 23 years in the machine shop business. He understood precision. Tom was teaching him to apply that same precision to thermal dynamics. Word spread fast. By January 15th, Tom had received 23 phone calls from people wanting information about tire wall construction. He held an informal workshop on January 21st at the Flathead Valley Community Center, expecting maybe a dozen people. 47 showed up. Tom brought his notebooks, his thermometer data, his wood consumption logs. He explained thermal mass, specific heat capacity, solar gain, and passive heating principles. He showed photographs of his tire wall construction process. He answered questions for 3 hours. At the end, a rancher from Columbia Falls stood up and said what everyone was thinking. "Tom, I've heated my barn with a forced air propane system for 9 years. I spend $1,200 every winter. If your tire system works like you say, I could cut that in half. That's $600 a year, $6,000 over 10 years. I'm building this next month." 22 other people said the same thing. Frank Patterson approached Tom after the workshop with an apology that took genuine humility. "Tom, I was wrong. I ran the calculations wrong because I didn't understand the system you'd built. I'm an engineer. I should have known better. What you've done here, it's brilliant. It's simple, it's effective, and it uses waste materials. I've been running thermodynamic models for 3 days trying to predict your performance numbers." And my models keep underestimating your results because they don't properly account for dynamic thermal mass interaction. I'd like to write this up for the Montana Engineering Association newsletter. With your permission. People need to know about this. Tom shook his hand. Frank, write whatever you want. Just make sure people understand it's not complicated. It's old knowledge applied with new materials. Anyone can do this. By March 1979, 17 homeowners had built residential versions around additions, sunrooms, and workshops. Dale Morrison completed his shop retrofit in February, using 538 tires filled with 64,000 pounds of dirt. His March heating bill dropped from $340 to $87. A greenhouse in Whitefish used 890 tires to extend their growing season by 6 weeks on each end. The Montana Department of Natural Resources examined Tom's installation, and their April 1979 report confirmed his numbers and recommended further study. The fuel savings across implementations were documented and consistent. Buildings with properly constructed tire walls showed 40 to 62% reductions in heating fuel consumption compared to identical buildings without thermal mass enhancement. The variance depended on climate zone, solar access, and integration with existing heating systems, but every single installation showed significant improvement. Frank Patterson's engineering analysis, published in the Montana Engineering Association newsletter in March 1979, included thermal modeling, heat transfer calculations, and cost-benefit analysis. His conclusion: tire thermal mass walls represent the most cost-effective passive heating improvement available for Montana buildings. Initial investment of $100 to $300 in materials and 40 to 60 hours of labor produces fuel savings of $200 to $800 annually, with a payback period of less than 1 year. The economic impact rippled through communities. Families spending $800 to $200 per winter on heating fuel suddenly had an extra $400 to $700 in their annual budgets. That money didn't disappear. It circulated through local economies. Grocery stores, hardware stores, service businesses all benefited from families having more disposable income. The tire shops in Kalispell and Whitefish, which had been paying $4 per tire to haul old tires to landfills, suddenly had people lining up to take tires away for free. This eliminated waste disposal costs while providing free building materials to homeowners. Environmental benefits were secondary to economic benefits, but they were real. Thousands of tires diverted from landfills, reduced fossil fuel consumption, decreased air pollution from heating systems burning at lower rates. Former critics became the most effective advocates. Dale Morrison brought every machine shop owner he knew to see his tire wall installation. He showed them his heating bills, his temperature logs, his fuel consumption data. "I spent 23 years heating my shop the conventional way," Dale told a group of contractors in April 1979. "I thought Tom was crazy. I was wrong. This works better than anything I've seen, and it costs almost nothing to build. If you're not at least considering this for your buildings, you're throwing money away." Sarah Chen incorporated thermal mass principles into her chemistry curriculum at Flathead High School, using Tom's tire wall as a practical demonstration of specific heat capacity and thermal energy storage. Mike Chen redesigned his engineering firm's standard building specifications to include passive thermal mass options for clients. The shift wasn't just in heating systems, it was in how people thought about building design and energy efficiency. Innovation bred further innovation. A contractor in Libby used water-filled tires instead of dirt, achieving 5 times better thermal mass. A rancher near Eureka combined tires with straw bales, dropping heating costs 68%. A builder in Columbia Falls offered tire wall retrofits as a standard service, charging $800 to $200 for installation. By summer 1979, he had 34 contracts backed up. Tom Hendricks died on November 8, 1994, at age 73, from complications of pneumonia. He'd spent 16 years after his tire wall innovation working as a furniture builder, heating his shop with the same barrel stove and tire walls he'd constructed in 1978. Total wood consumption over those 16 winters, 9.7 cords. Friends estimated a conventional heating system would have consumed 65 to 80 cords over the same period. Tom's original tire wall still stands today, still functional, still maintaining temperature stability through Montana winters. The rubber has degraded minimally. Tires proved remarkably durable when protected from UV exposure and filled with compacted dirt. The current owner of Tom's property, a younger couple who bought the place in 2003, reports the shed maintains 12 to 18 degrees above ambient temperature with no active heating, purely from passive solar gain and thermal mass buffering. Modern validation came from unexpected sources. A 2009 Montana State University study confirmed Tom's empirical results. A 2015 National Renewable Energy Laboratory study found tire-based construction effective for thermal mass in cold climates. The academic establishment confirmed what Tom had demonstrated 37 years earlier. The near loss of this knowledge represents a broader tragedy in how we approach traditional building wisdom. Tom's grandfather, homesteading in Saskatchewan in 1912, built with thermal mass principles because that's what worked in harsh climates. Native communities across North America had been building with earth and mass for thousands of years. Korean builders perfected ondol systems 2 millennia ago. Yet by the 1970s, American building culture had largely abandoned these principles in favor of thin wall construction, fiberglass insulation, and high-energy input mechanical heating systems. We'd traded wisdom for convenience, efficiency for simplicity. Tom's contribution wasn't inventing something new. It was remembering something old and applying it with materials his grandfather never imagined. Contemporary building practices increasingly incorporate thermal mass strategies. Passive solar homes, earth-bermed construction, rammed earth walls, concrete thermal mass floors, all represent returns to principles Tom demonstrated with truck tires in 1978. The Earthship movement, pioneered by architect Michael Reynolds in the 1970s, uses tire walls filled with earth as a primary structural and thermal mass element. Reynolds's designs, now built worldwide, prove Tom's concepts work at scale. Modern net-zero homes frequently include thermal mass storage as a critical component of passive heating and cooling strategies. The building science Tom's critics dismissed as foolish in 1978 is now taught in architecture schools as advanced sustainable design. The lesson from Tom Hendricks and his tire wall extends beyond heating efficiency. It's a lesson about humility in the face of traditional knowledge, about questioning established expertise, about testing assumptions rather than accepting them. Tom's neighbors weren't stupid. Dale Morrison was a successful machinist. Frank Patterson was a trained engineer. Sarah and Mike Chen were educated professionals. They were wrong because they relied on incomplete models, because they didn't question their assumptions, because they confused familiarity with understanding. Tom was right because he started from first principles, because he tested his ideas empirically, because he built something and measured the results. The difference wasn't intelligence, it was approach. We live in an era of accelerating technological change, of complex systems, of specialized expertise. But the fundamental principles of physics, of thermodynamics, of how heat moves through materials, these don't change. Mass stores heat. Dead air insulates. Solar radiation is free energy. These truths were as valid in Korean ondol floors 2,000 years ago as they are in passive solar homes today. Tom Hendricks didn't need advanced materials or sophisticated equipment. He needed understanding, persistence, and 342 truck tires. His legacy isn't a patented invention or a commercial product. It's knowledge freely shared, principles openly demonstrated, and hundreds of families heating their homes more efficiently because one stubborn furniture builder stacked tires around his shed and proved everyone wrong. Give this video a like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what other historical building techniques you want me to investigate. Were there other Tom Hendricks out there? Ordinary people who rediscovered forgotten wisdom and got laughed at before being proven right? What traditional building knowledge are we still ignoring today? Next time, we're diving into a Colorado rancher who built a greenhouse that grew tomatoes at 7,000 feet elevation through January using nothing but rocks, water barrels, and sunlight. You won't believe how simple the solution was and how many experts told him it couldn't work.